Welcome everyone to a conversation with Michael Earl Craig and Matthew Zapruder. My name is China and I'm here on behalf of the Montana Book Festival. We're really excited to welcome Matthew and Michael to this year's virtual festival and you, our attendees. I'd like to introduce you to our authors. We have Michael Earl Craig from Dayton, Ohio, home of the Gas Mask and Mood Ring. He is the author of Woods and Clouds, Interchangeable, Talkativeness, Thin Kimono, Yes, Master, Can You Relax, and My House, and the chapbook Jambong Jet. He lives in the Shields Valley near Livingston, Montana, where he runs a full-time farrier practice. He was a 2015 to 2017 Poet Laureate of Montana. Matthew Zapruder is the author of 5 collections of poetry, most recently Father's Day from Copper Canyon Press, as well as Why Poetry, a book of prose. He is editor-at-large at Wave Books, where he edits contemporary poetry, prose, and translations. From 2016 to 2017, he held the annually rotating position of editor of the poetry column for the New York Times Magazine. He teaches in the MFA and English department at St. Mary's College of California. And I'll let them go ahead and get started. Thanks, guys.
Sure, thank you, China. Hey, Earl, how you doing?
I am doing well. How are you today?
Good. You're in Livingston. I'm right outside Oakland.
Yep, and you have, I'm hoping that Simon is not still in the bathtub.
I don't think he is. Simon is my son. Going to be 6 in October. Yeah, I believe he's not, just based on the sound.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in, it seems like maybe a couple years.
Right. I was just thinking about how long we've known each other. It's a long time.
Yep. Mid-90s, 95, fall of 95, probably.
Yeah, you came to the MFA at UMass, and I had been there a year, I think. All right, and then I think we were in Jim Tate's workshop that fall, if I'm not mistaken, together.
Yeah, that'd be when we would have met with Christian Hockey and Michael Teague and Alex Perry. A
lot of folks were in that workshop. David Berman was still around. Joe Pernice was around. Tasha Trethaway was around. Yeah, it was a good crew. It was a great crew. I remember, I was thinking back on those times. Do you remember your first interaction with Tate? Do you have a memory of it?
Well, see, I had met him he'd come out to Missoula. I did my undergrad in Missoula, like 90 to 94, right in there. And he was out somewhere in that time as a guest reader. So that was the first time I met him. I remember I had a little, I wanted to get him to sign something. It was an after reading party. Dara Wire was in town as a visiting for the semester instructor. So the first time I met Jim, I had a little matchbox, Swan Vesta matches. And I opened it and dumped the matches out and brought a pen up, and I asked him to sign the inside bottom of the matchbox. I have no idea. And but I thought he might get a kick out of that, but he didn't seem to. This was my first interaction. He acted like I just brought up a blank little sheet of paper or something.
It's like,
yeah, he's like, hey, he didn't say anything. He just reached in there with the pen and did a little quick James Tate in the bottom, and then slid the door shut and then turned and started talking to somebody else.
you probably still have the matchbox, I would guess, right?
Well, that's a good question because, okay, so this is basically, this is not the box, but this is roughly what it would have looked like.
Beautiful.
But there's nothing in the bottom of this one. So no, I have been looking for that matchbox for a while. I keep thinking, well, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago I thought about it, and I was going through boxes. We'd moved a lot, and I have no idea. It will turn up, I promise.
So I remember, well, I remember you in that workshop, and I think, I don't know if it was in that workshop or not. I remember you bringing in a poem where you quoted Frost's, you know, my little horse must think it queer. Do you remember that poem?
Yeah, yeah.
Does that appear in a book of yours?
Yeah, it's in my first book.
Would you read that? I often quote this Frost, Robert Frost riff to people.
Let me find that. I know hold on a second.
Because I was also going to ask you what your favorite James Tate poem was.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, for a long time, the first poem I remember reading of Jim's that just, it was in some anthology, Good Time Jesus, caught my eye.
Sure.
And I'd never seen anything like that. And I memorized it. And then I walked around downtown Missoula for 5 or 6 days, reciting it on the bridge, in the park, at the post office, to strangers and friends.
Strangers?
And what's that?
To strangers?
Oh yeah, like I just remember, I thought I'd stop somebody and say, do you mind if I read you a poem? And then most of the time they'd say, go ahead, go for it. And I would read them Good Time Jesus. I also remember at that time loving The Blue Booby.
Oh yeah.
And I've read that at my brother's wedding, The Blue Booby. And I mean, those are two early poems that I kind of caught my eye. I'm trying to remember the title of that. Hold on one second. I know I'm pretty sure it is in this book, but
Good Time Jesus, for those of you who haven't read it, if you might be listening, is a prose poem that I think appears in maybe his third book or his fourth book. I think Ribbon Doggeries. I think it's in that book.
Yeah. Give me a second. I'm going to grab that poem as well.
Yeah, he's going to get that. Earl. I don't know if Earl's coming back actually. But yeah, it's a great poem. Anyway, hey, how's everybody doing? I was also thinking that maybe before we moved on and read some of our own poems that I would read something from his newest book. So maybe after you read Good Time Jesus, we can read. I was thinking about reading a poem from his final book.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. Let me read this, and then I'll try to find the one you're talking about. It would be nice.
I gave Good Time, my brother, when I went to study with Jim Tate, I gave my brother the Selected. It looks like you're holding the Selected, and I told him to read Good Time Jesus. And the shock of pleasure that he exclaimed at the end of that poem was like, it was like all the realization that poetry doesn't suck, like suddenly like burst into his like face, kind of, you know. So
yeah. Yeah, I'll read it. I found it. Okay, Good Time Jesus. Jesus got up one day a little later than usual. He had been dreaming so deep there was nothing left in his head. What was it? A nightmare, dead bodies walking all around him, eyes rolled back, skin falling off. But he wasn't afraid of that. It was a beautiful day. How about some coffee? Don't mind if I do. Take a little ride on my donkey. I love that donkey. Hell, I love everybody. Yeah, so you can imagine, moving through a big anthology of poetry and liking some things and maybe not liking everything, and but coming across that poem was just totally refreshing and kind of took me by surprise. That, I believe, was probably the first thing. What's the poem you're thinking of from his most recent book? You said you.
Oh yeah. Well, so I love his most. This is the cover of his most recent book, The Government Lake.
Mm-hmm.
His final book probably comes out backwards somewhere on the camera there, but anyway, it's really a great book, and this is one of the poems that this is one of the many poems that I love from that book. It's called The Argonaut. I don't know if you remember that one. The Argonaut. What made anyone think I was a communist? I don't know. I never went to any of the communist meetings. I didn't know any other communists. I didn't believe in any of their tenets. It's true, I hunted elk in the winter. I never actually shot any, but I followed them. And I laced my cranberry juice with vodka. But these things didn't make me a communist. I stood on the bridge and watched the boats go out to sea. I dreamed of going with them one day. I danced alone in my apartment. I hated my job with the government. I went to parties where I didn't know anyone. I went to the zoo and talked to the animals. I dreamed I had an affair with a zebra and its stripes rubbed off on me. I met a woman I liked and called her on the phone. She said she liked phone sex, and I didn't know what she meant. I lay on the couch and counted my blessings. They were none, or so few they slipped through my fingers. I got up and looked out the window. A cloud of sparrows flew by. I made myself a can of soup. I thought of my relatives, all gone except for one. I called her on the phone. She didn't remember me. I told her I was Edna's son. She said, I remember Edna. I never liked her. She cursed too much. My mother never cursed, but I wasn't about to argue. I went to the movies. I saw Hopalong Cassidy. I wished he didn't wave so much, but I liked the popcorn. I walked about the city feeding the pigeons. I bought a soda on the street. I sat down in a garden. A woman came along and sat down beside me. She said, nice day, isn't it? I said, yes, very, I like it. What do you do for a living? She said. I'm an accountant in the government, I said. That must be nice, she said. But most people I know think I'm a communist, I said. That's a joke, right? She said. To me it is, I said. To me you look more like an Argonaut, she said. What's an Argonaut? I said. It's somebody who swims in the deep waters of the ocean in search of treasure, she said. I found a penny in my bathtub once when I was a kid, I said. Then you're an Argonaut, she said.
I love I made myself a can of soup. Yeah.
That's true. That's he loved progressive soup, Jim Tate.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we love it. We could go on about him indefinitely,
Yeah.
but yeah, I've been, I was thinking about him because that's how we met under his auspices. So
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I remember we used to, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember we used to give each other writing exercises.
Yeah.
Remember this of escalating levels of absurdity. That was fun to do that in our MFA. That was good, but I don't remember much else.
Yeah. No, it was I'm not finding that poem. I just can't remember. I thought it was in this book, but I have no idea. Maybe later I will, we can move on and I can see if I.
Sure.
I thought it ended up in this book, but the Robert Frost.
My little horse must think it queer, but who cares what he thinks?
Isn't that how it opens? This is crazy. I don't. I would have sworn it was right in here, but well, anyway. So what else do you want to? I'd like to hear a couple poems from your most recent book. Yeah. Well, I could pick one, or do you have something you definitely want to read, or?
Well, I didn't. We were talking about this right before we got on, but I didn't. This was supposed to start at a certain time, and I assumed it was Pacific Standard Time, but it wasn't. It was Mountain Time, so I was late. So I kind of ran in from, the middle of bath time, so I didn't really have much time to think. But I I just opened actually to a poem in the book that's for Jim Tate. So maybe that's like makes sense, or it could
I
be
love it.
two on the nose, but this is called Behave Thyself. And that's the title of Jim also did some collages, and this is the title of one of his collages, and it's a poem for him that I wrote for him after he passed away in 2015. So it's called Behave Thyself.
What page is that on?
That page is it's on page 48.
48, okay.
Behave Thyself. He used to love to walk around the little town, checking up on nothing, saying behave thyself to squirrels outside the bookstore, then sitting an hour or so in the chair they called his when he wasn't around. I want to tell you something. It took me a long time to write any poems. I was always pretending I was talking to a tree. No echo in the wind. Also, he was a very private man. It was more like he loved among. There was a sound some afternoons, like a record needle being picked up too quickly. We all said thunder, where the baby goat was crying. In the hills, its mother loved it very much, but with distance. One day from Ashfield, it would be forever brought down into the valley to do great things, like visit Jim. He gets up from reading Street of Crocodiles or Young Slovenians to pet its head, then goes back to waiting for a name to arrive. His name, like that idea of like, you know, he has so many names in his poems, but also just something like, I don't know. I was just writing about him, and then I was like, suddenly it just occurred to me in the middle of the poem to just stop and just like think about all those years of trying to write poems before I could write them, really, and like the painful feeling. I don't know. I didn't get the feeling you really had that as much, because I felt like you were kind of already doing it when you were there, but it took me a while, because like maybe I was trying to shake something off in my life. I don't know. Like maybe I'm still trying to shake it off.
Right. Well, I go through those phases myself for sure. I did find that poem, by the way. It's not in that book that I thought it was in. It's in Yes, Master. I can read that. This is what must have happened is I wrote that at UMass and it didn't make it into the first book, apparently, and then probably just sat around and got revised, enough or changed. So I'll read that. This is the one you were referring to. In the January mountains. My little horse must think it queer, but who cares what he thinks? Listening to an animal might get me killed. Look what happened to Walter. And so I go on, not just with life in general, but with this particular day. And I allow things to happen, like the snow to come down, like Tom Waits's Alice, to create a tiny stainless drain somewhere in my core this morning. And I dig out and put on a very old pair of tennis shorts that looks like a dinner napkin. And I step out into the yard and kneel and pet the studded radial, like running a hand across an open field of steel baby teeth. And I think about flogging him, the horse. And I think about Klaus Kinski. What would Klaus Kinski do? I think about how, in theory, the hammer is never to hit the anvil. I think about how a butterfly, if permitted, will crawl neurotically all over a soldier's face for half an hour. The snow sifts down like so many blankets. As I move out across the pasture, I think about this. I can't say I'm surprised to find my little horse breathing a dent for himself in the snow, nor that the dent looks strangely like a baby Jesus on his back, sinking into the snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I must have just got sidelined and then resuscitated later. That's because I know that that was a worked or written at UMass.
I remember that poem made a big impression on me because, well, for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, first of all, it was really a great poem, you know, which you don't always see in workshop. And then also something about how it kind of moves from this like highly objective tone into some sort of like what I guess I would call like tenderness or compassion, like, but I don't know, but it's hard, like that moment when the butterfly's crawling over the soldier's face, or like that moment where the baby Jesus, like the dent in the snow. At first it sounds like kind of funny or like almost like a throwaway line, but then something, when you repeat it, it's like, I don't know, something seems a little scary about it, I guess, like the idea of like a baby's, like a baby being left in the snow. I don't know. It sounds stupid when I say it, but it's like, I remember. And also other thing is like, I'd studied Russian literature. And so that for me, that image of the horse being flogged, I mean, that's something that's famous from Dostoevsky, you know, like the sort of watching the horse be beaten and kind of like what that tells you about human beings and stuff. And the way you like imagine yourself doing that was like kind of exciting and scary.
Right. So I'd like to have you, I would love to have you read Birds of Texas from the new book. That's on page 35. This is one of those poems I have all kinds of little pencil marks in the margins. I love this poem. This is a great book, Matthew. So many good poems, and I love just the range of things in here. But if you don't mind, Birds of Texas, would you read that?
No. Okay, Birds of Texas.
Yeah, okay.
I like to be alone in someone else's house, practicing my cosmic long-distance wink. I send it out toward a mirror, some distracted, bored cosmonaut dropped on an asteroid, hurtling closer to our star. No one watches me watching thousands of television hours, knitting a golden bobcat out of tiny golden threadlets. These good, lonely days, everything I've claimed I've seen, for me to use it glows. I'm waiting for the love of Alice Ghostly, who keeps in various phases and guises appearing amid the plot machines, always to someone more beautiful and central in complex feudal relation. They call her plain, but to me her name sounds full of distant messages, beamed 1,000 years ago, only now to flower. Penultimate cigarette, high desert breezes. I've written all my plans and vows on careful scraps of paper, piled beneath weirdly heavy little black rocks I gathered on many slow walks into town, to ask no one who would bother naming this particular time between later afternoon and twilight. Crazed bee, I know the name of the plant you are in, salvia. Also the J is not blue, nor the sky or indigo bunting. Within particles and feathers, sun gets lost, making expert holographers out of us all. Passerina, I saw your dull blaze from the railing flash and an insect disappeared. Afternoon once again slipped into the gas station. Like it did those old days, it had a body that moved and smoked among the people, whistling a cowboy song concerning long shadows, happy and unfree.
Yeah, I love that one.
Oh
yeah, thank you for that. It's
So oddly, given the poem that you read, that one actually was a remnant from 2 books before. It was originally written during the same time I wrote the poems of Come On All You Ghosts, which I wrote in Marfa, Texas. And I had this little bird watching book called Birds of Texas. And so like all the details about it, but it was like kind of there was something like really bad about the poem. It was, I don't know what it was. Like, I don't even remember exactly, but it like didn't work and didn't work and didn't work. But I always kind of felt like maybe there was something there. Like at the end, the ending was there, but like all the stuff at the beginning was somehow different. And so I just needed to like come back to it. And then, and maybe part of it too was that like that book had a lot of poems like that in it. And this book doesn't have as many like that type of kind of like drifty thing. And so I liked it in this book better too. So I don't know. Yeah.
That's interesting that how we hang on to something. We're trying to force something on a poem or something we're working on, and we just decide it's broken. We can't see the way out, and either throw it away or lose it or just bury it and maybe look at it again later. But then at some point, it's the imaginary prison or the chamber that poem is in just goes away. And what I guess I'm getting at is, as poets, the job is really so easy to change a poem. It's not like we've made a film and we want to reshoot. We want to take an actor out or add something. It should be. It's a poem, so it's easy to fix. But we can't see the way, and then something has to happen. Just time has to pass. But I think that's really interesting. That I guess does that happen with you a lot, where you'll abandon something or not that much?
So it used to. I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think it was Peter Richards, our erstwhile friend Peter Richards, who he said to me once, and I don't know if this was his original thought or someone had said this to him. Knowing Peter, was probably an original thought. Like you're always writing 2 years ahead of yourself or 2 years behind yourself. I don't know about always, but a lot of the time. And like sometimes, you're like writing this poem that's you're like not quite ready. I don't know, maybe ready for is a little too sentimental, but can't handle yet, or you're just not. Like it's an intuition more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so it's like kind of a mess. It doesn't really work or whatever. And then sometimes, I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes I feel like I'm right. Like I write a poem and I'm like, oh, that's something I did a million times. And just like, it's almost just like not. So yeah, I used to be that I would write when I was writing a lot. I mean, I do write a lot still, but when I was writing a lot, like in grad school and stuff, and I have a big pile of poems that didn't work, I'd kind of just, at some point I just stop and just circle the good lines, and I just retype them, and then I just have this pile of lines, and I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to try to make something out of this, try to compose, and so, there's a bunch of poems in my first book that are like that, and it's kind of, sometimes they sort of fall into this weird like narrative pattern or single speaker, and then other times they can feel kind of a lot looser, but I miss doing that. I mean, that was really fun. Did you do stuff like that, or do you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, and there have been a couple poems that don't make it into a book, and then they'll sit off to the side, and then I'll reconsider them and try again, and either just look at it and say, well, maybe I kind of like this. I can see this working. I like this more now than then, maybe, or try to mess with it, and it fails again. I have a couple little scraps and poems that just keep kind of floating down the dirty river, or just like and they probably should just be buried. But most of the time, what I try to do is see something through. I try not to abandon.
Yeah.
And that to me has just always been part of the job or the act of writing. Whereas sometimes I talk to people and they do a lot more of that, where they'll move on, and they'll write 30 poems, and they'll end up with 8 or 10 that they really like. I usually just kind of hound something until I force it to be something that I like, which I don't know that it's right or wrong, but
I feel like maybe for you, part of that has to do with the rhythm of your life. Because of your profession, and like that it's very busy at certain times, and not, it's like, I don't know. I wonder how much that process might have to do with just like how your work life you know, has
Mhm.
seasons. So when you're in the season that you're not as busy and you have time to write, I guess the season that we call winter, um,
Yeah.
right, that like, so that's when you're not shoeing horses so much, or you're doing a little bit of that work, right? But it's not like as busy
Mhm.
as during the summer and better weather. So that's like your time, and you're like, you know, you're not just gonna like give up with a little resistance there, because it's like, you know, you can't depend on the rest of the year to just be available for you, I guess. Is that right? Or is that like not true really? Or
Yeah, maybe, except I tend to, whether I am writing in the summer or the winter, I tend to kind of do that same thing um, where I don't know, I just feel like sometimes I push and work on something and it just never goes anywhere. But usually, I kind of wish that I had more, you know, I think it's always good to try to develop new habits. Like, one thing I wanted to ask you about your new book are these longer poems. You've done that a, a lot. You know, it's not like a brand new thing for you. But one thing that I do notice about my own poems is quite often I tend to condense and chisel and pull stuff away and make it smaller, and I'm and I and then, but so I feel like I'm giving, sometimes lately I feel like I'm giving up. I and I love to see some of these longer poems in your book. It's kind of inspiring to.
but you say that,
I don't.
I
Yeah.
mean, we worked, so, you know, full disclosure, I'm your editor also. I have been your editor, what, since your third book? You did the first two books with Fence, and then starting with the
Yeah.
third book you published
Right.
with Wave Books, and now, you know, I'm your editor, so we work, and I love your most recent book. And I kind of, so what happened with that book, if you do you mind me, I don't know if you mind, hope you don't mind me sharing, but like there was like a version of it and we kind of like talked through it, and it was, and we were sort of like we were like trying to figure out if it was like really ready to go or not, right?
Yeah.
And then you actually, I was like, hey, whatever you feel, you know, if you feel ready, great. If you don't, I could see it going either way. But you actually were the one who said, no, I want to take another, whatever it was, 6 months or whatever you decided on doing. And then all these new poems. So you had, I think you had one or maybe two of those poems about like sort of what I guess I call them like biographical poems, kind of. Is that what, like that, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
and then a bunch more of those seem to start to come, like a bunch more of them came, right? Is that my?
Yeah, I think that 6 months was maybe one. It was strange. Uh, One of the most productive. Normally would worry me, and maybe I should still be worried looking at the book. I don't know, but to be adding so much new material at the buzzer, you know, because like you were saying, you were saying, well, I think this is a done manuscript. Let's do it. Something was bugging me about it, and I did. I took a 6 month extension, but yeah, I feel like I clicked into a zone, and I just was. Part of it was, again, it was the winter.
Right.
No, wasn't working a lot of time to read, to be reading, to be editing what I already had. And when you edit something that you already have, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but you start to see the holes in the main places that might be not necessarily weak spots, but partings in the curtains where you start to see places where new material could be generated from but you're not in a position to see that, you know, a year earlier, because I'm not even thinking about it really as a book. I'm just kind of writing poems. But during that editing phase, I get to a spot where I see these downfalls or pitfalls, and so that 6 months I ended up just writing. It was so liberating. I don't know.
I would love to hear like a couple of those poems in a second, but I just want to say before, like maybe before that, I mean, so I think if I had been sure that the book was done, and then believe me, this has happened with many other poets, I would have put a lot of pressure on you not to take the extra time. But I think because we've known each other so long, I could tell you weren't really satisfied. And also I knew you had this winter period coming up. So, and I figured, well, what worst comes to worst, you might write a bunch of poems and it just stays kind of the same. It doesn't matter. Like, you know, and I just want to say that thing about the opening. You know, I remember when I was writing my first book that I remember looking at the manuscript in the beginning of it, and there was one poem and then another poem, and I was like, oh, I wish there was like another poem here that could like bridge these two poems. And I was like, oh wait, like I wrote the fucking poem. Like I can write, like who, like what, like that was like actually a really big moment for me. I was like, wait, what do you mean? I wish I could make that wish come true, you know? Like I could just do it. And so I remember writing a thing and being like, oh yeah, that was exactly the thing I needed to be there. And it was such a great feeling. Like I love that feeling of like taking that opportunity, you know? So I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like one of the most fun things about putting a book together, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe can I hear like a couple of can we hear a couple of those poems, those biographical poems from the new book?
Yeah. Do you have anything in mind, or you just want me to?
No, I love them all. So whatever you feel kind of comfortable.
I'll just pick a couple.
Yeah, read at least two, if not three. I mean, they're not that long, and I think stringing them together would be interesting. So.
Okay.
Hold up the cover so you can see it.
Yeah. This is
it looks so good. Yeah. Woods and Clouds.
Orange. Yeah. I love how the book came out. All right, let me see. I will read so all of these poems started with I'd think of somebody that I wanted to write about, and then either use the encyclopedia, and if I couldn't find it, I just was looking for any 2 or 3 little biographical facts about them. If I couldn't find anything there, I would definitely go to Google, just Google them, Wikipedia, and try to amass, just type out on a sheet of paper some things about them, any little odd thing. And then as quickly as possible, move into just, you know, writing about them as if it was an official kind of a biographical exploration into the person. But all of them have are many facts, if you want to. But so it's not like I made all of this up. It's a blend. This is called "Who Was Franz Liszt?" Preferred haircuts: the striking Dutch nun, aka the Spaniel, and his signature curtains, blown dry. Plagued, it's pointed out often, by dropsy, asthma, insomnia, a cataract, and heart disease, not to mention his feelings of desolation. You can hear it in his music. His pedaling, said to be a form of breathing. His breathing, said to be strangely similar to his use of the pedals. Father of Cosima, who is married to von Bülow, but ran off with Wagner, who's said to have gone on to woo someone named Gautier and perhaps even Pringle. Do you follow? Faint creaking of petals. Gradually, winter rolled in. The other thing is all the lines are 4 syllables, and those are the main rules. Pick some subject you don't know much about, or maybe I do some quick and dirty research, and then try to make these kind of nimble, quick poems with all the lines having 4 syllables. Okay. Who is Catullus? Libidinous comet savant, traveling sometimes at us with simpering boy tools on tethers. Fresh lettuce hung from his rafters. Au revoir, he'd say, waving scarf and/or crumpet. Spread himself thin, he didn't mind. So many other people's gardens to tend to, invectives and condolences. His married girlfriend, Claudia. Could be Caesar would want his pool cleaned thoroughly. All gates left ajar in autumn. Maybe I'll read one more. They're kind of quick,
Love
short.
it.
This is Who is Joan of Arc? A pious child, grave beyond her years, wore a plaid cloak, thick glasses. Her friends called her Joanie of Arc. History feared her. She said she heard voices. She said she saw lights, had a dachshund she called Kenny. She slept always fully dressed, her parents the retiring type. It's believed there were more than one of her. Unlike the rest of us, she had just one executioner. His name was Jeff the Raj. They say he paused, but this ain't about him.
See, I don't know, to me, like, to me, those are big poems. You know, I mean, I know they're like not long, but they're big, they feel like there's a lot of space in them. I don't know how to describe it otherwise, just but you know, I'm just so interested in how all the different ways a poem can have a center of gravity. You know, and in this case, it's like, you know, this person's life kind of, and then also the voice telling the story are like somehow so present that you can do a lot of things in the poem, and you can range around a lot. I don't know. I just love like how yeah, I think of like Interstellar. They're like the distances between the thoughts sometimes feel like planetary, you know, but yeah, I really dig those poems.
So one thing that's that I always kind of marvel at is like our relationship. You have been my editor, so you've like made suggestions on poem order, and I think it was Thin Kimono, you had a completely different way. I think it was actually a different, it was talkativeness, how the book began. You brought poems from the back of the book that I had sort of buried. You brought them forward and made some great decisions. But what I guess I'm getting at is, so we have this relationship, but you also have this relationship with all these other writers, and I don't. I only have this one editor, but you are editor to many people. And how do you feel that job affects your writing life, the way you see writing poems, because you're constantly being asked to really immerse yourself in somebody else's project? What's that all about?
Well, so I mean, just to be honest, it's hard because the reality is that like there's a certain kind of it's very hard. I think with us it's a little easier because we've known each other a long time, and I think there's a lot of trust there, and that's true for most people that I work with as an editor. But there is a power dynamic that it's impossible for me to escape, which is that like in theory, like I control like whether or not the thing gets published or not, even though the reality is like I actually don't, you know, it's always yes when it comes to, you know, you and other people I work with, you know, but I'm saying it's like, it's just like tense for me because I never want to feel like I'm forcing anybody to do anything, you know, but I also want to give my opinion in a way that's like helpful and meaningful. And so that's just one aspect of it. But then there's also just the general sense of being somebody who can do things for people, which I think we all have more or less in our lives, you know, when we move on as writers. But it became like intolerable for me a couple of years ago, after I was doing the New York Times thing, which I didn't request. I mean, I was contacted and asked to do that, and it was great. But like, so I was doing that, and I was an editor at Wave and blah blah, and I started to feel like I couldn't have a real relationship with anybody because I didn't know if I was really connected. So I just started to withdraw from all those things. And with Wave a few years ago, I don't do any acquisitions. I work with people I already work with, like you and Matt Rohr and some other poets I love, you know, I work with. Jeffrey Nutter has a new book coming out, and some other people. but Tyehimba Jess and people like that. But I don't acquire anything new, and I don't make any decisions about what gets published to Wave and what doesn't. And I don't do anything else like that right now because I just found it corrosive to my sense of like reality and dealing with other human beings. And so, yeah, I mean, but the actual work itself, I love. I mean, I love talking about books and their order and like what's going on with them and poems and what's happening. And each relationship is really different. I mean, some poets like, you know, like Matt Rohr or Jeffrey Nutter, they're likely to show up with like a lot of poems, sometimes even hundreds of poems. And so it's more kind of like, let's talk about which ones are working, you know, whereas other people like you have a much better idea, I think, of the book when you show up, or somebody like Timothy Donnelly, you know, your sense of the book itself is usually, you know, more like, you know, so that's a different kind of conversation then. So yeah, I like that part of it's great. I just don't like the power part of it. And so I try to do everything I can to get out of that actually, but you know, I think I've mostly gotten out of it at this point.
Mm-hmm. I do remember that time when because I was recovering from some health issues and spending a lot of time on the couch, staring out the window, and I remember telling you that basically like all I'm doing is sitting on this couch lately and reading and working on poems, and I don't have that relationship. I'm not in any, you know, in a situation like that. And I remember clearly, this would have been, you know, like 3 years ago, you telling me that you were just kind of fried. I mean, you said basically you wanted my job, which was recuperating on the couch and having nobody to
maybe it was a sensitive thing to say, given the fact that you were having health issues, you know?
Yeah. No, but anyway.
I'm envious of your health issues. You know?
Yeah. No, but I would also think that it could help you, I don't know, maybe does it help you just as a writer when you go back to your own writing and material, or is it just kind of like, that's one thing I'm doing there? Maybe it's going to be hard to know.
I don't know. I think you know, you're one of the biggest poetry nerds I know. Like once you get into like this is an example. I mean, we're probably going on, you know, quite a while. I mean, we could talk all night about poems, like how they work and why this is this way and everything. It's like, you know, so for me, it's just like I just enjoy those conversations, and I like them when I'm teaching. That's what I want to do when I'm teaching too. I just want to talk about how poems work and why this thing next and what happened with this decision, whether it's workshop or if I'm teaching like a literature course or something. And so I think that kind of thinking helps me when I get to go to my own poems, but just it's not, but I have to also let go of, I think it's very dangerous to be too conscious about those decisions. And so I think I've managed to find ways to just be really like uncareful when I'm writing, in a way that I'm careful when I talk to you about your poems, you know, or anybody else, or Dara or somebody like that. But I'm not careful when I write mine, because I think if you're too careful, you just end up, you know, writing a very tame, like conventional poem. And I want to write things that I don't understand, and I don't know why they are the way they are. Yeah. I don't want to understand my poems too much, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably a good. So maybe I would love to. Okay, you mentioned time, and I don't know exactly where we are. I think we've been. I would love to hear another poem or something from your new book, and I have a couple options that you could read something, or we could read some of these other a poem or two from somebody else something that we love.
Well, I was thinking that maybe I was going to read something for you. I wrote a poem that made me think about the poems of yours that you had just read. You know, about people, because I have a couple of new ones, and I'm sure that this poem I'm going to read is, you know, I doubt I would have written it if I hadn't read your poems about humans. So even though I wasn't conscious of that when I was reading it, but then I was looking at them now and I was like, of course. So I don't think I've ever read this poem. It's pretty new. it's so. Are you a Witold Gombrowicz fan? Or am I making?
No. I mean, I won't say I'm intentionally not a fan, but
You don't hate him.
No.
It's not one of these.
Not that I'm going to say during this Zoom interview.
Polish poet, Polish writer, not a poet at all, actually, Polish prose writer, but yeah, he anyway. So, and he spent, as you know, he spent a long time just sort of writing a diary that kind of never ended, and he wrote for decades, wrote this diary, and then he would just occasionally publish excerpts from it or whatever, and you can read it, and he's got a great essay. I think it might be called Against Poets or something. It's in the diary or whatever. But anyway, this is a poem for Witold Gombrowicz. I'm reading your diary is a weird thing to say, even to someone dead, who lived in Argentina, furious at Europe for all its stupid museums full of poor people crying for the amusement of strangers. I can vacuum all day and the book will be waiting. Open all the wrong doors and your voice will be there, saying poets are enemies of anything real. They think flowers love them and every pastry deserves an elegy. I took a train to Poland and breathed in so much black smoke, near to the odd rust-colored monument to your birth, made of local stone. The train hurtled through vast forests whose names sound like monsters. I took so many notes about vital matters of the heart and mind. It's a kind of discipline not to remember who I was in the past. I hoard all my energy for future atoning. On your birthday, to honor you, I will pull down my trousers with total disrespect and pee on a very old tree.
That's weird. That's weird. I want to say this. I mean, first of all, I love the poem, but pulling down your trousers and peeing on something. There's a recent poem where there's some peeing on a rock. I know this is getting a little peeing on rocks. It's something we can do. It's a picnic attachment, is what my wife says. It's like, well, you know, has this thing about how guys have the picnic attachment. I think about it all the time when I pee on things. Like it's time to do this, and because I can. And I love to see. I can tell when you're reading this poem. First of all, you're looking at it on the screen. There's
I don't even have it printed out because I didn't. Yeah.
But there's also this like kind of enthusiasm because it's something newish. And you said I love that. You can usually tell. You know, sometimes when we read stuff, we read something a bunch, or it's 8 or 10 years old. But I love your reading of that was awesome.
You forget, it's like, I think that's a good point, because like sometimes when you're reading something you've read a lot, like you can start, it's like there's room for all the self-consciousness and self-doubt to creep in because you're so familiar with it. But like, I was honestly like, I didn't know what was coming because I wrote it, you know, obviously I read it after I wrote it, but then I haven't given any readings. I've given hardly any readings over the past year, basically. And so this poem's only a few months old. Maybe it's a month old, I don't know. So I was like, I didn't know, I actually really had forgotten what was coming next. So I was kind of like trying to also just make sure I didn't like read it wrong, I guess. So it was really, there wasn't any room to not be totally into it, I guess. But it's, but maybe do you want to, is the poem about peeing on a rock done, or is it, you know?
Well, it's not exactly done, but speaking of new things, what's been going on with me a lot during this last few months, well, actually it happens quite a bit, is can't sleep, I wake up. I think poets, writers do this a lot. You have an idea, you try to work it in you're lying there in bed staring at the ceiling. But I have a lot of insomnia, can't sleep moments, sometimes that I write about in the poem. And sometimes I just get up and I'll work on a poem in the middle of the night. So last night, I'm lying in bed and I was had a couple of lines or ideas, and I didn't want to lose them. So I wrote this poem, is brand new, and this is something that might be. I wrote this at like 2:30 in the morning last night, and And I'm going to read it because who knows, it may end up being, this might be the poem, or it may end up being a poem 2 or 3 times longer later, or it could end up being pushed to being 2 or 3 times longer and then reined back in and end up right back in a similar spot. This is called Firmaments.
Called what? Firmaments, you said?
Firmaments, yeah. The cat chilled out in the basement, sniffing carpet swatches. Auburn nights required auburn thoughts. The whole family slept throughout the large house in each of the many upstairs rooms, with each of their heads hanging awkwardly over different edges of their beds. Most aimed at the ceiling, one aimed at an open window, and one, in one of the colder rooms, was aimed at an open book that sat on a dresser in another room, in someone else's room.
Oh man, I love that. That ending.
So,
I think you know, one thing I just want to say, I mean, we could talk, and we probably should think about winding up pretty soon, but like, you're super into movies, and just, that's just one of those poems. It's like, I definitely feel the camera, like in that poem, especially like towards the end, that it pans into that, and then the book is in and out, and like, it's just, there's a very kind of like, yeah, I mean, filmic is sort of a dorky word, but like movie-ish.
yeah. And, you know, maybe, you know, at the moment this morning or last night, I thought this might be a poem, and it is a form of a poem, but maybe it'll it'll be bigger or change.
I kind of think there's like this way, and I mean, maybe I'll just finish with something short that I just wrote, because I think it's interesting to think about the ends of things, like when they're new, and whether we permit them to stay like so open like that. Because I got like kind of like a shock of thrill at the openness at the end of that, like the way it just sort of like opened its hands, and like the end, it was like, that was it, you know. But like, I wonder sometimes whether we don't like second guess that later. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe you don't, but I probably do. But
oh no, I mean,
I love that feeling at the end of that poem, you know, like just that it just sort of ended, it just sort of dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know?
it's kind of a bad place to be, you know, but you have to be there in order to write and be critical and make decisions. You have to be seeing it as a possible poem in a text, something that somebody might be reading, but it's also kind of a bad place to be. I mean, it's fun. It's fun. I always try to get back to the joy of just writing poems when I was 19 or 20 or 21 or 22, and I wasn't, not that I spend a lot of time thinking about making it perfect or getting it published or something. I really, you know, I feel like I do a pretty decent job of not obsessing with that, but there's a big difference between the joy of writing at 2:30 in the morning and just having fun working with language, and then thinking about whether it's a poem or not. You know, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the sometimes I think, you know, about that's what poems are for me, is to let me feel that feeling, and that is so elusive, you know, especially as you move into the more, you know, move further on in your life, and obligations and other kinds of things happen. Like, you know, of course I love making poems and having them come out well and coming in a book, being published or whatever, but honestly, like, I just feel they draw me into a space that I'm not otherwise in ever in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so different from all the other ways that I am in my life, that I just think like, I'm just so happy when I'm writing now.
Yeah.
You know, just be in that space. And I don't know, joy or happiness, I don't even know if that's the right word. It's like just a kind of, pleasure isn't the right word either. It's just like a feeling of engagement. That's so clinical to say engagement, but like, I don't know, something.
Yeah.
Having your mind be alive. Anyway, I'll read this short new one, and you can tell me what you think at the end, because maybe the end isn't really there yet. I don't know, but I wrote this very recently. So It's called Letting My Son Sleep Late. Eerie music from the window of the hour. Is it coming from the leaves? The rain is almost here. I want to find its source. Cellos leak to that same darkness, a golden door. One more moment and I will pick up the peaceful blue book. Now it's an accordion, and I'm back in the little apartment next to the vast park that fills half the capital city of that tiny country we used to take turns visiting, where I felt so alone on Sundays with Joshua's typewriter. I had to say something.
Huh. Yeah, that's a very abrupt. Yeah, it kind of you got me with the way it closed. I mean, when you turned from the screen, I was
It's just funny because like when I read it now, I just think, man, you know, like I had such a good time writing that. You know, and that's a good time. You know what I mean? Like it brought so whatever. 2 weeks ago, I guess there was there were huge thunderstorms here that set off these wildfires, but we never have thunderstorms in Northern California. So I woke up and it was really early in the morning. These storms were going, and I wrote a couple of poems as these huge booms were happening and then this rain was coming. It was like very strange because it's just not the kind of weather we have. And I felt somehow like this poem, and then next door, these people live next door and they're nice, but they're like kind of odd. Like I can't really put my finger on them. They're like an older couple, and she's sort of like mystical kind of. I don't know. She has this. Seems to be something like I wouldn't be surprised if she was like into some really obscure religion or something. And so this really creepy, super loud music. Yeah, you're right. And that's the religion. And it was coming from like right next to where I was, right? This super creepy, like eerie music, and then this booms. But I was just like, whoa, I got, you know. So this was just my way of processing that experience, like being, you know, like actually paying attention to it, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I enjoyed it, but
yeah. It's just, I know we've talked about some of your other newer poems that you've been actually sending me via text. And they're just I just think it's refreshing to be, again, not that it's an impossible place to be in, but it just seems like it can be hard to get in that spot where I don't think joy or pleasure or I mean, they're all sort of variations, but just that charge, that the act of writing is what it's about, and not all of the other things. I mean, at some point you have to make those critical decisions and push yourself as a writer, but I just think it's key to be able to go places and not have to always.
It's a different conversation, the one that we don't have time to have now. But I do think that you and I were the last generation of poets who grew up in a time when you had to really make a huge effort to get your poem out of your really, really, really small periphery, right? Like you and I were hanging out. At that time in sort of like the early, I guess mid 90s in Massachusetts. And if I wanted you to read one of my poems, I had to like print it out and like bring it to you, which we did. I mean, I would try, you know, and it wasn't like it was that hard to do, or put it in an envelope and mail it, or maybe you call someone on the phone and read it to them or whatever. But like just email was not really being used. Yeah. I mean, it was there, but it was not something we used a lot, I don't think. Like, and so there was just there was a kind of like thing you had to get through to get your poem to get to other people, which was frustrating a lot of the time, you know, and you wanted people to read them and all that kind of stuff. And that was all, you know, like, and I'm not saying, I mean, I understand the urge to publish things. I have that urge too, of course, everybody does, but like, it was nice that there was also some like pushback against it too, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that maybe I try to keep some of that in my life still, like because I miss that feeling.
You mean like, what's an example of that? Like texting or moving a a poem into a text and sending it, or what do you mean by that?
Just the idea that when I write something that there's a space between where it lives, where it's not immediately for public consumption of any kind.
Right.
You can just show to one other person. No, and I mean, yeah, I text you a poem, but I mean, I guess that's a little bit of a different thing. That's to me is more like driving to your house and giving you a poem. Actually.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It kind of is.
Like that sharing thing. It's like, and it doesn't necessarily mean that poem that I send is going to go in a book or be. I mean, I haven't sent out poems at all recently. I think I'm just really enjoying being in a different kind of space right now. But not that I think that's better or something. I don't think it's better. It's just where I like to be right now with my poems. It's more, you know, I don't know. It's just.
Think about all the time spent riding our bicycles or vehicle across town to Insty Prints or Kinko's, waiting in line with a wet wool coat on, maybe like a, you know, just kind of miserable, just and using the copy machines and envelopes and everything. I mean, I try not to be. I really don't. I don't want to go back to that, but I do see what you're saying. There's a spot where somewhere around our generation where that just all ended. I mean, the whole idea of riding a bike across town in the snow to photocopy a poem 6 times to give to 6 of our friends who lived in town. It's
no, it ended at a specific time. It ended in basically 1999 to 2000, because what happened is that first of all, email became much more widely used. Also, websites, which did not exist, suddenly 6 months later, people had websites and blogs and everything. So that and the other thing that happened is that desktop publishing software became incredibly powerful and incredibly easy to use. So you went from like making a book became something that's really hard to being easy, both because you could email the manuscripts back and forth, and you could do the mechanics of making the book and printing it and all that kind of stuff. And so it happened in the course of like probably I would say like a year and a half of time. Like it went from, and so I remember being in the copy shop in Amherst and running into you when you were sending out your manuscript and you were sending it to Fence to that, right? Because you won that.
Yeah.
So I actually, when you were making the copies, like we ran into each other like in that copy shop. I was probably also making copies to send out something or whatever, and like, you know, and so, but it is different. I don't want to fetishize it or make it like better. It's not better. It just was a different thing, and maybe I just miss it a little bit. But I don't know. But maybe we should wind up like, you want to wind up with like one. You have something new you want to read or anything from the book, and maybe let's each read one, and then we'll.
Well, okay. So I've got new poems. There's also that Elizabeth Bishop poem that I could read, or we don't have to do that. What do you maybe?
I want to hear a new poem from you. I'd love to hear that. It'd be great.
Okay.
Maybe we can end with that.
Well, you have something you're gonna read?
Not necessarily. I mean, I could, but I just you know, I was.
Okay.
I didn't.
All right. This is man, there is something that I but time-wise we probably should wind it up, but that has to do with reading and how we read a poem, because typically I will read if I read a poem 2 times out loud to somebody, and I do this a lot with Susan. We'll take a drive and I'll have a stack of other people's books and I'll read poems. And what I find is so interesting, and we did this today on a drive where I was just reading different poems, and the first time I read a poem, I over-articulate. I think I go very slowly, and maybe I'm trying a little too hard to get to, maybe not, but articulate every word. And quite often I'll say, do you want to hear that again? If she does, I'll read it a second time. And the second time I kind of ripple through it a little bit. more quickly, more conversationally. I'm not so worried about every little word and enunciating. Sometimes I'll bend those line breaks. I won't hit everything as hard. And I just think that's so interesting. I was reading the Bishop poem to her today, and I read it. I tripped a couple times, you know, but which is, I don't mind actually. That's. But then the second time I read it, it's just so different, and I think that's interesting too. Though the different ways that you can just read text off of a sheet of paper. But why don't I read? Should I read the Bishop poem or a more recent poem?
Which poem is it?
It's Under the Window, Uro Preto, where she's looking down at the water fountain in the street from her apartment in Portugal or some, yeah. It's one that but anyway, I can do either one of those. These guys will be able to edit all this out. Like what I'm saying right now, they can just snip Earl out. But anyway,
can they give me a mustache that's more populated?
That's what I'm kind of hoping we both could get. We could get real good, like
move back and forth, like.
All right, I'll read a new poem. This is called the Return of Stanislaus. Now that the corn is up, I'm going to try to read it. I'm going to try to read this poem the second way, a little more nimbly, a little more quickly. I'm going to pretend that I'm doing that. I think I can do it. The Return of Stanislaus. Now that the corn is up and the hay is down, or that the hay is up and the corn is down, now that the sides have been touched up, have been oiled lightly and hung in the rafters, now that bucolic wonder has washed across the valley, has flowed like champagne light into every nook known, now that the wheat has been separated from the chaff, never again one to intermingle with the other, and the pheasant has been shot on the run, or even if it wasn't running, and plucked of every feather on the trail in the dust, and hung then from the pommel for any traveler to see. Now that the horses have been greased and carefully parked under waxed tarps, where they'll wait in beige box stalls for oats and maybe apples. Now that night is fallen, now that the comet can be seen in the sky, but probably won't be, and the smell of baked bread is moving through castle corridors, and the feeling a foot might have as it passes down into a silk stocking is not entirely out of the question. Now that candles are lit, that mice are on the move, that dried blood has marked the stoop, it is now that I bend down to lift the little one into position. Now that day's been on the run and ran, and out from shadow steps my stand.
Oh man, that's so good. Can you read those last two lines again? Sorry, is that annoying?
Yeah. I'll just go up. Now that the candles are lit, the mice are on the move, the dried blood has marked the stoop. It is now that I bend down to lift the little one into position. Now that day's been on the run and ran, and out from the shadow steps my stand. So that's a
Love that.
fairly recent one. It was another one of those wake up in the middle of the night and
just rhyme it. You just rhymed at the end. Decided to rhyme at the end like that, like just kind
of. Yeah. So the thing about this poem, I'll say, is I'm writing about a painting that I've been kind of wanting to write about for years.
Yeah, you sent me this poem by text. I think I loved it.
Yeah. So basically, the poem, for anybody who wants to Google this, and it's an arresting poem. Painting is it's Magdalena Ventura with her husband and son by Giuseppe de Ribera, 1631. So it's many.
You own this. You own it, right?
No, I think Susan and I we saw this painting in Madrid.
I didn't actually think you owned it. It's probably in the Prado, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a large, famous painting.
It's amazing if you own that painting.
Oh God. Well, hold on. Actually, I'm kidding. We do own it. It's right over here. No. That would be amazing. So it's a painting I've tried to write about for 2 or 3 years, and it just doesn't go well. It's such a strange painting. And so this time I took a different route. Instead of trying to write about the actual painting, I'm writing about events that might have led up. This is the subject of the painting, speaking about her day, and her husband coming home from work, whatever it is he does. So yeah, I mean,
bloodletting. He's a professional bloodletter.
He is
a real collection of leeches.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
but so do you have a final?
Yeah, I'll just read one and then we can. I mean, I could do this all night, but
yeah.
So with the shelter in place thing, I kind of got. I have these periodic like paroxysms of like, I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna develop some new habit or like hobby or whatever. And so I was like, I've always wanted to garden, right? Like a lot of fucking people had this thought, right? And so I was like, but I'm gonna do it. And I like went and got the seeds and did the whole thing, blah, blah. And I planted sunflowers, not realizing that if you plant sunflowers like kind of in a bigger garden bed, they get like terrifyingly huge. Like you should plant them like in a pot or something, because if you plant them in a big like garden bed, they get so big that they topple over on themselves. So that was a learning experience there. So anyway, so I wrote a bunch of poems like as these sunflowers were growing, like over the course of weeks, I wrote several poems about them. And so this is just one that I'll read. So yeah, it's just called Sunflower Poem. I want to fall asleep in the middle of the afternoon, but I stand here in the yard, wondering why I planted the sunflowers yesterday all over the garden, knowing they would never grow nearly tall enough to penetrate the diurnal gloom or turn their heads to follow the lamp. I've never planted anything, but a voice kept saying, now. All afternoon, the leaves like green coins above my head made that sound in the single redwood my neighbors planted 60 years ago, so it's still young. And the old skull cloud came to complain for too long about a handsome ice storm that promised to return last winter. The lamp softens all things it nears, so I will go near it, because I need to write the difficult letter that says enough. The skull says it was you who planted the sunflowers, so I slipped through the chipped green gate to ask forgiveness of Our Lady of the Forest. She answered with her silence. I came to you in a dream and told you put the seeds in the black soil, then forget the deeds of your enemies. And you did. And now those sunflowers will grow tall, and unlike you, they will never die. So,
yeah,
anyway.
I love that 60-year-old young tree. What was the line about the leaves? What was that? How did you describe what?
All afternoon, the leaves like green coins above my head made that sound in the single redwood.
Yeah. Do you remember those? In the Amherst, Northampton area, that's the first time I had ever seen people had big sunflowers, and tobacco was a major crop, and sunflowers, and those ones you're speaking of, where they would just have these, size large pizza type size heads, and they would, fantastic. I'd never seen.
Seem to be judging you.
Right. Yeah.
Like they were very, very large. Those sunflowers, it was like not acceptable how big those sunflowers were.
Yeah.
I mean, not to
so
me.
you planted these in your yard anyway, even though you'd been told not to do that.
Well, no, I didn't. I had not been told, but
yeah.
I mean, probably me never having planted anything was on some level obeying some instruction that I should have continued to obey. But yeah.
You could have done cucumbers, something like,
Next year.
yeah.
Next
yeah.
year.
Next year.
Come on down and have some.
Yeah.
Anyway, man, it's great. It's great to catch up.
Yeah, it was.
We don't have to record it next time. We can just,
I know we should. This could be the new normal. Let's just wait and see what happens.
It's a good use of technology, I think, for me anyway, personally. So
yeah. Okay, so well, here comes China. Hello, China.
Hi.
It's been a long time. Sorry, we were like.
No, it's been
catching up, I guess, basically.
It's been an absolute pleasure to watch you interact and share your love for words, for each other's words. Thank you so much to both.
Feel free to chop it up.
I know. I talk with my hands.
No, I said, feel free to chop it up. I said.
Oh.
Edit.
I mean, edit.
Edit this. No, we're gonna
chop it up.
We're gonna play it exactly like this. Even this part, it's all just gonna be.
Okay, so I'm gonna read the Bishop poem after all. No, I'm just kidding.
Go for it. I'm like, I'll say.
Read a biography.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Michael, Earl, Craig, and Matthew Zapruder, thank you so much for joining us for our first virtual film festival. Congratulations on Woods and Clouds Interchangeable and Father's Day. And thank you to everyone watching when you watch. Just as a reminder, you can purchase books by these authors and many others at Fact and Fiction's website, factandfictionbooks.com. I also urge you to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There you can also donate so that we can continue our programming after the festival with our MBF Plus events. Have these guys back on and just watch them talk for more. Anyway, it's been great. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Have a good night.
Next time. Thanks.